Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. Today we're going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. So, let's get going. Lincoln was shouting in his ear, but Graham was deafened to that. All the others save the woman gesticulated towards the hall. He perceived what had happened to the uproar. The whole mass of people was chanting together. It was not simply a song. The voices were gathered together and upborne by a torrent of instrumental music. Music like the music of an organ, a woven texture of sounds, full of trumpets, full of flaunting banners, full of the march and pageantry of opening war. And the feet of the people were beating time, tramp, tramp. He was urged towards the door. He obeyed mechanically. The strength of that chant took hold of him, stirred him, emboldened him. The hall opened to him, a vast welter of fluttering colour swaying to the music. "Wave your arm to them," said Lincoln. "Wave your arm to them." "This," said a voice on the other side. "He must have this." Arms were about his neck, detaining him in the doorway, and a black subtly folding mantle hung from his shoulders. He threw his arm free of this and followed Lincoln. He perceived the girl in grey close to him, her face lit, her gesture onward. For the instant she became to him, flushed and eager as she was, an embodiment of the song. He emerged in the alcove again. Incontinently the mounting waves of the song broke upon his appearing, and flashed up into a foam of shouting. Guided by Lincoln's hand, he marched obliquely across the centre of the stage, facing the people. The hall was a vast and intricate space, galleries, balconies, broad spaces of amphitheatral steps and great archways. Far away, high up, seemed the mouth of a huge passage full of struggling humanity. The whole multitude was swaying in congested masses. Individuals' figures sprang out of the tumult, impressed him momentarily, and lost definition again. Close to the platform swayed a beautiful fair woman, carried by 3 men, her hair across her face and brandishing a green staff. Next to this group, an old careworn man in blue canvas maintained his place in the crush with difficulty, and behind shouted a hairless face, a great cavity of toothless mouth. A voice called that enigmatical word, Ostrog. All his impressions were vague, save the massive emotion of that trampling song. The multitude were beating time with their feet, marking time, tramp, 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 tramp. The green weapons waved, flashed and slanted. Then he saw those nearest to him on a level space before the stage were marching in front of him, passing towards a great archway, shouting, "To the council!" Tramp, 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 tramp. He raised his arm and the roaring was redoubled. He remembered he had to shout, "March!" His mouth shaped inaudible heroic words. He waved his arm again and pointed to the archway, shouting, "Onward!" They were no longer marking time. They were marching, tramp, 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 tramp. In that host were bearded men, old men, youths, fluttering robed, bare-armed women, girls, men and women of the new age. Rich robes, grey rags fluttered together in the whirl of their movement amidst the dominant blue. A monstrous black banner jerked its way to the right. He perceived a blue-clad and a shriveled woman in yellow. Then a group of tall, fair-haired, white-faced, blue-clad men pushed theatrically past him. He noted 2 Chinamen, a tall, sallow, dark-haired, shining-eyed youth, white-clad from top to toe, clambered up towards the platform, shouting loyally, and sprang down again, and receded, looking backwards. Heads, shoulders, hands, clutching weapons, all were swinging with those marching cadences. Faces came out of the confusion to him as he stood there. Eyes met his and passed and vanished. Men gesticulated to him, shouted inaudible personal things. Most of the faces were flushed, but many were ghastly white. And disease was there, and many a hand that waved to him was gaunt and lean. Men and women of the new age, Strange and incredible meeting, as the broad stream passed before him to the right. Tributary gangways from the remote uplands of the hall thrust downward in an incessant replacement of people. Tramp, 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 tramp. The unison of the song was enriched and complicated by the massive echoes of arches and passages. Men and women mingled in the ranks. Tramp, 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 tramp. The whole world seemed marching. Tramp, 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 tramp. His brain was tramping. The garments waved onward, the faces poured by more abundantly. Tramp, 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 tramp. At Lincoln's pressure he turned towards the archway, walking unconsciously in that rhythm, scarcely noticing his movement for the melody and stir of it. The multitude, the gesture and song, all moved in that direction. The flow of people smote downward until the upturned faces were below the level of his feet. He was aware of a path before him, of a suite about him, of guards and dignities, and Lincoln on his right hand. Attendants intervened, and ever and again blotted out the sight of the multitude to the left. Before him went the backs of the guards in black, 3 and 3 and 3. Excuse me. He was marched along a little railed way, and crossed above the archway, with the torrent dipping to flow beneath, and shouting up to him. He did not know whither he went. He did not want to know. He glanced back across a flaming spaciousness of hall. Tramp, 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 tramp. Chapter 10. The Battle of the Darkness. He was no longer in the hall. He was marching along a gallery overhanging one of the great streets of the moving platforms that traversed the city. Before him and behind him tramped his guards. The whole concave of the moving ways below was a congested mass of people marching, tramping to the left, shouting, waving hands and arms, pouring along a huge vista, shouting as they came into view, shouting as they passed, shouting as they receded, until the globes of electric light, receding in perspective, dropped down, it seemed, and hid the swarming bare heads. Tramp, 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 tramp. The song roared up to Graham now, no longer upborne by music, but coarse and noisy, and the beating of the marching feet. Tramp, 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 interwove with a thunderous irregularity of footsteps from the undisciplined rabble that poured along the higher ways. Abruptly he noted a contrast. The buildings on the opposite side of the way seemed deserted. The cables and bridges that laced across the aisle were empty and shadowy. It came into Graham's mind that these also should have swarmed with people. He felt a curious emotion, throbbing, very fast. He stopped again. The guards before him marched on. Those about him stopped as he did. He saw anxiety and fear in their faces. The throbbing had something to do with the lights. He too looked up. At first it seemed to him a thing that affected the lights simply, an isolated phenomenon, having no bearing on the things below. Each huge globe of blinding whiteness was as it were clutched, compressed, and a systole that was followed by a transitory diastole, and again a systole like a tightening grip, darkness, light, darkness, in rapid alternation. Graham became aware that this strange behaviour of the lights had to do with the people below. The appearance of the houses and ways, the appearance of the packed masses changed, became a confusion of vivid lights and leaping shadows. He saw a multitude of shadows had sprung into aggressive existence, seemed rushing up, broadening, widening, growing with steady swiftness, to leap suddenly back and return reinforced. The song and the tramping had ceased. The unanimous march, he discovered, was arrested. There were eddies, a flow sideways, shouts of "the lights." Voices were crying together one thing. "The lights," cried the voices, "the lights." He looked down. In this dancing death of the lights, the area of the street had suddenly become a monstrous struggle. The huge white globes became purple, and with a reddish glow, flickered faster and faster, fluttered between light and extinction, ceased to flicker, and became mere fading specks of glowing red in a vast obscurity. In 10 seconds the extinction was accomplished, and there was only this roaring darkness, a black monstrosity that had suddenly swallowed up those glittering myriads of men. He felt invisible forms about him. His arms were gripped, something rapped sharply against his shin. A voice bawled in his ear, "It is all right, all right." Graham shook off the paralysis of his first astonishment. He struck his forehead against Lincoln's and bawled, "What is this darkness?" "The council has cut the currents that light the city." "We must wait, stop. The people will go on. They will—" His voice was drowned. Voices were shouting, "Save the sleeper. Take care of the sleeper." A guard stumbled against Graham and hurt his hand by an inadvertent blow of his weapon. A wild tumult tossed and whirled about him, growing as it seemed louder, denser, more furious each moment. Fragments of recognizable sounds drove towards him, were whirled away from him as his mind reached out to grasp them. Voices seemed to be shouting, conflicting orders. Other voices answered. There was suddenly a succession of piercing screams close beneath them. A voice bawled in his ear, "The Red Police," and receded forthwith beyond his questions. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. So, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.